One of the problems with the NHS is poor record keeping and crazy record keeping, as is demonstrated in an article in The Guardian this morning about Kevin Roberts, who is one of the many people who has been damaged by the contaminated blood crisis. When he was 12 years old, he had wisdom teeth removed. He was given factor 8, which was infected with hepatitis C. And he's one of so many people, 3,000 people who died, 30,000 people infected, but he's not received any compensation because his medical records were destroyed, have gone missing, or have been withheld. Well, I'm fully aware of this nonsense. I tried to get a copy of some medical records a while ago, and because the paperwork I'd been given had been covered in blood because the hospital fouled up and failed to give me the proper blood support that I needed, because I'm also on the haemophilia scale. They ignored the advice that I gave them. They gave me stuff off the shelf called tranexamic acid, as opposed to the real stuff that is actually efficacious. And so a week or so after my surgery for cancer, my wounds opened up and I was bleeding. For about 2 weeks, I had to be readmitted into hospital. And it was horrible. It's bad enough to have the diagnosis of cancer in the first place. You have that sort of sense that you are facing death. And then you have the elation that you've survived, and then suddenly you start bleeding like somebody on the front line of a battlefield, and you think it's all happening again. And it doesn't provide a lot of trust in the NHS. So I wanted a copy of the original documents I was given, which detailed the sort of cancer that I had, and I asked my GP for these copies. It took a long time, and what I got was completely different to what I'd originally been given, with completely different diagnoses and so mad bureaucracy. And I've pretty well given up trying to make sense of it, actually. So I understand where Kevin Roberts is coming from. The NHS should be finding proper records, should be keeping proper records. All the records should be kept in the same form. I had documents while I was in hospital which referred to me as she. I had documents which got so many details wrong. I don't know which documents I'm supposed to consider to be correct and authentic, and which documents I'm supposed to dismiss with a giggle and say, these are not relevant. Mr. Roberts was extremely sick after his tooth operation in Truro. He had jaundice, his entire body was yellow, even his eyes. He was in excruciating pain, like there was glass in his joints, he says. He lived for the next few years with a fog and severe weakness. I went through the early part of my life thinking it was normal to be in pain and weak. And he was diagnosed with von Willebrand's disease when he was 11. And he went for regular 3 monthly checks after his wisdom teeth operation. And while the nurse would wear protective clothing, his family wasn't told that he'd been infected. All this sounds worryingly familiar from my point of view. And when he was 18, a medical team took 14 tubes of blood. He asked why so much blood was required. And he was told, oh, don't you know we're testing for HIV? You've already had hepatitis A, B, and C. You still have C. you may not make it till 25. I remember that conversation. I had the same 14 tubes of blood taken from me. And that's fairly frightening. He felt ostracized. When the HIV test came back in an envelope, he felt he couldn't open it. He left it for more than 2 weeks unopened. When he did open it, he discovered he'd not been infected with HIV. But it's not acceptable, is it, that people go through this stigma and the hospital records aren't properly kept, the GP records aren't properly kept, and the compensation isn't properly awarded. But, from that point of view, even if he had proper records, even if the records were clear, the compensation would be tardy and dismissive, because that's the way our government seems to approach compensation. All the rhetoric, oh yes, 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 we want to help, but none of the reality of actually doing so. There's this huge gap between the two cases. The infected blood inquiry is due to have its results published on the 20th of May, and it's reported that the full total cost of compensation could well reach £10 billion. Yeah. It gets higher and higher the longer you put it off. And I'm sure the full compensation for the people who have been damaged and hurt by the post office nonsense, that again will be a huge bill. The Windrush nonsense, a huge bill. And those people who have been imprisoned and it's been proven that they were imprisoned falsely, and the compensation to them, a huge bill. But these bills must be paid, because the government must recognise that people acting in its name have overacted and have acted without proper care and consideration, and that people have been hurt in the name of the government. In the name of the government must make restitution, and it must go beyond rhetoric. It must enter the field of reality, and if that costs money, that costs money. I'm so ashamed of the way these matters are being treated, and I'm so sorry for the people who are suffering so much. Kevin Roberts, and as far as Kevin is concerned, yep, I entirely know where he's coming from. I'm hugely sympathetic, and there but for the grace of God.